Well, hey, welcome back to the Recruiter of Oz podcast. I'm your host, Scott Smith, joined by my other host, Mark Tortorisi, and by popular demand, Jesse Lane of J Lane Career Coaching. Say hey, Jesse.
Well, hello.
Hello. Thank you for joining us again. We're stoked to have you back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Hey, so today we have an interesting topic, and it came about as part of a conversation we had in our last call with Jesse, where imposter syndrome came up. And as many of us have possibly experienced, this is an insidious potential issue that many people have to deal with throughout their careers at one point or another. But what we want to do is kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive into what this is, look at some of the effects of this syndrome, and then basically have a discussion about, how you deal with this. Does that sound all right, peeps?
Cool.
Yes. Super duper. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Mark, and he is going to kind of set the stage here with what imposter syndrome actually is. Mark, take it away.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's also kind of important to talk about it because a lot of people say it. It's like a thing that people say and they throw it around all the time. And I'm not sure everybody thinks it means the thing that it means, but sure. I think it's good that we get an official kind of definition of it from Jesse. So Jesse, what would you consider imposter syndrome really is?
Well, most concisely, I would just say that it's doubting your abilities or feeling like a fraud or an imposter, despite previous successes, despite credentials, despite your ability to show up authentically. So that every time that you've got that sense of panic or doubt that should I be here? Do I belong here? That's imposter syndrome.
Totally agreed. And what I would actually add to that is also we attribute the successes that we have often to external factors other than the skills and the experience and our qualifications that we bring to the table. So that's just kind of a side note to that. Sorry, Mark, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, so this can occur at work, and it can also occur as you're searching for work. Let's say you work on a team within a company, a high kind of priority team. Everybody graduated from some top tier school, and they have the pedigree, they have the nice super sized giant company experience. And then you come in and maybe you graduated from your local community college, or maybe you didn't graduate. And then you kind of bounced around, you kind of found your way, and then you kind of got there. Yeah, you reached the same place as everybody else for different reasons. But then when you're there, you're looking around, and you're like, one of these is not like the others. You're all, I think it's me. So I think that's an experience of having it when you're on the job, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I think that when you're on the job, then that can cause you to do different things. That can cause you to feel like you have to work, do more, work harder, say yes to everything, over deliver on the promises, on the work, so that you can kind of feel like that you're keeping up with the perceived work of everybody else, even if they're maybe not even doing that.
Yeah. It's funny. It really can lead to a vicious, self-serving cycle where you feel this imposter syndrome. And so you react to it by over preparing or over showing up, or the opposite, which is withdrawing and disappearing and not bringing yourself to the table. And then when you don't die, you're like, oh, I did the right thing by over preparing or by not showing up. And so you're like, okay, next time I feel it, I'm going to do the same thing. And so that's the cyclical part of our responses to it.
Absolutely. Right. And maybe we should actually look at some of the characteristics really that are associated with imposter syndrome. So, I mean, there are a number that come to mind, but obviously the first and foremost one from my perspective is self-doubt. And again, Mark, you and Jesse, you've already touched on that, but you undervalue your own contributions to the organization, to the team. And again, you attribute your own success to external factors. Hey, everybody on my team was pulling me along, and I was just really lucky. I had access to things that other people wouldn't, so I was able to pull this success out. you tend to sabotage your own self-success. You talk yourself down, and you set unrealistic expectations for yourself that are just really unattainable. And I mean, I'm going to stop right there because I have a number of former situations where actually my managers were the ones that were setting those unrealistic expectations. So I have to wonder really what, where is that cause then? Because, in a situation like that, you're questioning your own abilities based on these expectations and goals set by the manager. When, so then that's really a conundrum. I don't know if I even want to open that can of worms, but I had to.
No, you have to. This is so important to bring up, because the first thing, so in my, what do you do about imposter syndrome? The very first question is, well, where is it coming from? Yeah. Is it a culture imposed imposter syndrome, which means I am in an environment that is telling me I'm not good enough.
Right.
So that can create imposter syndrome. And so if that is where it's coming from, you handle it this way. If it is an internally driven imposter syndrome, meaning everyone has told me I belong here, but I still don't feel like I do, that's a whole different brand of imposter syndrome. But you're spot on. It's who's telling me I'm a fraud. Is that external or is that internal?
And I think that in the situation today, if I'm not mistaken, I think that the easiest one, easy is relative, obviously, to address here is the internal one, because that is that which we can control. Yeah. But when you're in a situation where you have it imposed upon you, I mean, do either of you have experience with that? I mean, I do, but if you have experience with that, how did you navigate? Because that's something that's very difficult when you can't control the perceptions of other people when it relates to how you're doing in your own job.
Yeah, I mean, I had a job. They will remain nameless, but I had a role where my boss, my direct boss, told me literally I was not good enough to be doing the job, and they said that, hey, the work that you're doing is actually a person below you.
Oh, and my God.
Like that, I was literally just told that constantly. And I was like, okay, well, what would you like me to do? They wouldn't really tell me. They would just say I was not doing the work the way they wanted it. So it was that for the entire time I was there. So it was a very, toxic situation, to say the least.
Yeah. I want to touch on that. Jesse, what about you before we go into that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have. I'm a woman. So I spent most of my life being told, you just sit back. Just sit back. It's okay. Let the pros handle it. Let the rest of us handle it. And even I didn't get my degree until I was in my 30s. Okay. And I remember a lot of discussion around, the degree requirements for jobs where it's well, you can't be a senior recruiter. You don't even have a bachelor's degree. And it's right. But how's my performance? How am I doing in the role? And so, I've definitely experienced it. And, it's so funny because when it's external, there are, you really only have two options, right? Because especially when it's coming from leadership or from your corporation, you can either say, screw that, I do belong here. And but that's an act of activism, right? Yeah. That's an actual act of protest to continue to show up in a space where somebody's telling you not to. Or you can say, you know what, I need to be in this space because I need the paycheck. And so I'm going to conform. But you literally in the external situation, either show up as an activist or a pacifist where you decide to conform. And those are kind of your only options.
But, to me, that's really insidious, though, that kind of situation, because basically you've got that immediate stress where you're being told that you're not good enough or you're not able to, you're not qualified for this role. But then you start internalizing that. And I think, in a situation like that, if you weren't someone who would have otherwise had those types of feelings, I wonder in future situations, are you going to second guess yourself and start thinking, wait, maybe I'm really not good enough for this new role that, I succeeded into. So that is really crap, in my opinion. I mean, for lack of a better word, to have managers tell you that. And I've had managers tell me that. And really that's what that did for me in previous roles where I was managing people was exactly the opposite. It's like when you have a parent where you're abused, right? And you get out and you say, I'm never going to do that to my kids. Well, okay, so that's kind of the same thing here where you're told all of these things. You have to internalize that. You've always got those questions. But the one positive in my mind that comes out of that is that when you're leading that team, hopefully you have got enough self-awareness to basically redirect that and try to enable and build up people as opposed to tearing them down. I mean, a lot of times I think with a situation that a manager is telling you that you're not good enough for a role, that's their own, problems and their own, there's a word I'm looking for, but you see, being my age, I've totally forgotten it, but they're not feeling good about their ability to do a certain job, so they're basically projecting that onto their own team to make themselves feel better. And I'm basically going down this psych rabbit hole, Jesse. So basically, pull me back, please. That would be great.
Well, it's so funny. So our backgrounds, we've got a psychology background and a sociology background, and psychology is very individual focused. Sociology is a zoom out social perspective. And so, it's very interesting. And, from a sociological perspective, what's so cool, or not cool, I love the data, so I'm always geeking out about it. But what's so funny is that imposter syndrome disproportionately affects high achievers. So people who desperately want to show up well at work are the ones most likely to suffer from imposter syndrome. And so you're totally right that it typically starts externally, and then we internalize it because we're high achievers, because we're performers who want to show up the way that our leadership or community wants us to show up. Right. And so then that voice is in our head. I call my mean voice Agnes. Agnes. And she is just such a B word, and she can be so mean. And we internalize that external voice that says, well, if only you were fill in the blank.
Right. Yeah, no, that's good. I think that's good. I mean, I think so you basically, if it's at work, then you kind of like either rage against the machine, or you're like, just sit back and say, one of us, and that's it, right? I mean, those are your kind of like two choices. So I think that's good. I mean, I guess the things what would you say the things are to do to kind of like fix that? Because I mean, obviously if you're like high performing, you have the imposter syndrome. I mean, I wouldn't say to like, we'll just do the bare minimum, because like, again, like for some people that might not be an option. Like for me, personally working, like I don't ever sit there and say like, well, I'll just do the bare minimum. Like normally I kind of like overdo what I need to do, and then, then present it or whatever it is. So what's the suggestion for people who are working and who have this? How do they maintain their level of sanity while still producing?
Yeah, well, I mean, quality. Balance is always the name of the game, right? So we're always seeking to achieve balance. But once it becomes internalized, which it does quickly, usually for most of us, and because you do, once you have an external experience, you can choose to relocate. So go to an environment that does support you. And so let's say you've done that. Now you're in a supportive environment. You've left the unsupportive environment. Now you're in a supportive environment, but now it's internalized. Now your imposter syndrome is coming from Agnes, your Agnes, whoever it is. My son's is Doug. Mine is Agnes. We liked Doug because we could alliterate, damn it, Doug. And that one was fun. But whatever your self-imposed, internalized imposter syndrome is coming from, I have 5 steps that I coach my clients to do when they deal with honestly anything that they're going, oh, I don't like this. And literally the first step is just to recognize that it's happening at all, right? You have to recognize, you have to go, oh, wait a minute, I'm feeling like a fraud. So that's step 1. The next thing is to actually just sit with that for a second and go, ooh, I don't like that. That doesn't feel good. This is something I would like to resolve. Right. And then the third thing is to inquire about it. Ask yourself some questions. Am I a fraud? Am I showing up in a way that isn't authentic or isn't, credentialed? Even like I'll share, speaking about imposter syndrome made me have imposter syndrome, because I was like, wait, do I have any right? Like, is it even responsible for me to speak to an issue like this? So I literally had to do these steps today before I came to this call. We're like, wait a minute, am I a fraud? and answer that honestly. If the answer is, yeah, I actually don't have a right to speak to this, then back up, right? But if you have a right to show up in this way, then give yourself permission to show up in this way. Am I holding myself to a fair standard?
Mm-hmm.
Am I experiencing an expectation of perfectionism? My favorite question in these situations is, would I hold anyone else to the same standard that I'm holding myself to right now?
Right.
That's a good one.
How would I coach a friend?
Yeah.
What if my best friend, my peer, my coworker who I love and lean on, what if she told me, I think I'm a fraud? I would tell her no. So that's the third step, is to investigate it, ask yourself those questions.
Yeah.
And then this is my favorite one, and this is the somatic coach in me: express it. Emotions. This is an emotion. Imposter syndrome is an emotion. It's doubt, it's shame.
Mm-hmm.
And emotions, when expressed, express themselves fully in 30 seconds to 3 minutes. Withheld, repressed emotions affect you all day, right? Like, have y'all experienced that?
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
So
go ahead. Sorry, I was going to.
No, it's okay. Feel free to interrupt me at any point, and we can dig in, and I'll finish.
No, it's all yours. Go ahead.
So from a somatic perspective, it's like, okay, well, how do you express shame? Like, how do you express it, especially in an interview situation? You're experiencing imposter syndrome. You've challenged yourself. You said, no, I do deserve to speak to this. I'm qualified. I'm holding myself to an unfair standard. Allow me to move forward. Yeah. Even just like a sigh or a shoulder roll, because when we repress emotions, we get really still. We literally become these little solid concrete, containers for emotions. Right. And so just remembering to move your body, roll your shoulders, literally raising your eyebrows has a psychological effect on calming. Yeah. Taking a deep breath, moving forward, even that is expression enough. If you're alone and you can shake it out, then you can shake it out, but literally an expression of the emotion. Right. And then the last step is nurturing, is to comfort yourself, and if that's physically, even just giving your shoulder a squeeze or something like that, or offering yourself a mantra, I deserve to be here. Right. It's okay. I get to speak to this. So that last step is that permission, that self-validation and that self-nurturance. And if you can build that in, if you replace your cycle of hyperactivity, over-preparing, over-explaining with this cycle of self-inquiry, self-validation, emotional expression, you really, really can develop new habits around these things.
Right. It's all about that affirmation. And side note, before you go, Mark, we go back to that perfect quote, man. Stuart Smalley, they were brilliant on Saturday Night Live. Again, I invoke this. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
It's so good. It's such a good one.
It's true. I mean, you take it with it, it's tongue in cheek, but at the same time, it gives a message. It sends the right message. And we need to pay attention to that. We need to be able to step back and try to evaluate ourselves more objectively, as we would other people outside of our sphere. But obviously, when you're too close to the baby, it's very difficult to step away sometimes.
Yeah.
And gosh absolutely. Darn it, people like me.
Gosh darn it.
So, okay, so that's like a good way to handle it. Like the steps that you said, that's like a good way to handle it for people to kind of get in the right mindset and to kind of move past it. So how do we take this now and change it for our audience, for the job seekers? Like, you're looking at a job and you're like, oh yeah, I could do that. And then you kind of look at maybe the number of applicants and you're like, oh, maybe I can't do that. Or, or you look at the job and you're like, think I could do it, but then, there's probably better people who could do it than me. Like, how do you address that kind of imposter syndrome before you even hit the apply button on a job? Same thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, same thing. Okay. Am I a fraud? Do I meet the requirements for this job? Do I have every right to be interviewed just like everybody else who meets the requirements deserves to be considered for this? And kind of like how Scott kicked us off, adding to the definition, remembering your successes. I think that hyping yourself up, I mean, gosh, we talk about affirmations and these funny little things, but it's true. Like stopping and saying, wait a minute, because usually when you're applying to a job, it's because you've done that job.
Yeah,
or it's
exactly.
because we always get the job we've already done, even if it's a promotion, right? Because that's especially high achievers, the people who are struggling with this to begin with. We're getting the job that we've done. And so taking the time to literally remind yourself of that and to ask yourself, wait a minute, am I even giving credit to who was responsible for my successes? I love giving credit to my mentors. I love giving credit to my coaches, to the leaders who believed in me, who gave me opportunities that I wasn't ready for yet and let me grow into them. I'm so grateful for them, but I absolutely do the thing of going, they're why I'm successful. They are.
Yeah.
But I had to show up. I had to say yes.
You had to do it. You had to do
it.
Yeah.
So one thing that somebody pointed out to me, like, I forget where I just heard this, but which is something that I didn't do, is for you to basically do the self-affirmation thing, like write down the stuff that you've done. Like, I don't know about you, but like when I first started, like probably in my first, like, I don't know, 10 years in like staffing, I really didn't write down all the stuff that I did. Like, I just did it. Like, I didn't write down like the number of hires. I didn't write down like all the clients. Like, I just didn't write it down because I was like, whatever, I'll remember it. But after a while, you're like, okay, wait, did I do that? What were the numbers? Like, how good was I? Or what did I hire? Like, you kind of forget that stuff. So I think it's a good idea to help with this imposter syndrome and to help with the self-affirmation, for you to write down everything you did. Even if you think it's going to be fresh in your mind from a couple jobs ago, write it down. Like, document all of your stuff. Now, don't just document on your resume, because your resume will look like a laundry list of like mess. But I would say probably write it down somewhere so you can call upon anything that you've done and have that history, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things I'm sure we've all heard, it's kind of pop psychology right now, but it's like gratitude journals and how important it is to like keep track of what you're grateful for. Well, something that I challenge my clients and candidates always to do is that, because we always have to prepare for our performance reviews, right? That's part of it. And I always tell people to have a section, whether they share it with their leader or not, but because this is a good practice, our performance reviews of sitting down and reviewing what we've done. And I always have a section for myself that's what I'm most proud of. And sometimes it's not the most quantifiable thing, what I'm most proud of from that half or that year. But I keep track of those, like, because all the performance review stuff kind of disappears and I never look at it again. But the things I'm most proud of, I keep record of. Even if it's like I had a conversation with a peer who I was able to train off the record, and she, was able to close 3 offers because of it. And it just felt so good to have been the coach to the peer who had the success. So she's the one who's taken the 3 offers to her performance review. But I'm really proud of having participated in cheering her on or offering her the steps of how to escalate to get the comp that she needed, to get the sign-on bonus that she, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So keeping track of the things that you're really proud of, in addition to the things that you put on your resume, really helped me with that like internal voice part a lot.
Right.
What's interesting, sorry for interrupting really quickly, but what's interesting as a candidate, hearing you say that, Jesse and Mark, is that I haven't been eating that dog food, right? We want to eat our own dog food, as they say in tech, but I hadn't been doing that. I keep certain things throughout my career that I think would show up well on a resume in terms of what results, what are some of the numbers, how do I quantify, but I don't do enough of that. And job seekers, I think this is an important and salient point, is that when you're doing your resume, you want to make sure that you're putting in those things that you accomplished and that you were responsible for, and the results that those accomplishments saw. And I think that this all goes into that whole process. And not only does it further reinforce the fact that you're probably not an imposter, but it also shows well on resumes, and it shows other employers or future employers that, wow, this person really is good for this job. So I'm going to have to get off of this call, and I'm going to have to go back through my resume and go, okay, well, now I have to start doing this gratitude journal thing. And I have to also start looking at the accomplishments as they happen, because otherwise, I do lose that. And when you do that, then you don't have the reinforcement for why you're qualified for a certain position. And all of a sudden, the imposter syndrome feelings kick back. This is a vicious cycle, people. I don't know if I can handle this.
It's a vicious cycle. It's terrible. Well, and just like with parenting, like you forget, right? Things just disappear. They go away from you. So the things that you put on your resume, how many hires, how much you moved the needle on DE&I hiring, how much those are things I'm proud of. I'm very glad that I was able to do those things. But what makes a company really lucky to have me is the way that I show up for my peers. It's the way that I take the extra time to work with the candidates. But taking the extra time to work with my candidates decreases my numbers because it means that I'm spending more time on the phone per candidate than another recruiter. But that's what I'm proud of, is that every one of my candidates remembers me forever. So, like those are the things that I'm proud of. And that's what makes somebody lucky to have me versus somebody who's going to hit all the numbers and check all the boxes. But what makes them lucky to have me, Jessie, is the way that I show up, And so I think that it's so important to make sure as we're struggling, as we're all drowning in our own imposter syndrome, to take that time to praise yourself and say, wait a minute, what am I proud of from like a character standpoint? Because that's what makes me different than everyone else. And everyone else who's showing up is showing up with their own character and the things that they're proud of. But if you're able to show up and talk about what you're proud of in an interview, they've already read your resume. They already know you can check the boxes. That's why you're there. But being able to show up as like a really wholehearted person who's really aware of what they're proud of makes a huge, huge difference.
Right. Absolutely. Side note, Jessie, I think I'm going to go back to the curriculum for psychology. I know you were a minor in psychology. So there was something, what was it called? Oh my God. I just totally blanked. You know what it's like when you're like got this great idea and then all of a sudden you totally blank on it? Right. External high self-monitor. So a lot of times when I'm trying to bring my A game, I'm trying to always strategically decide how I'm going to beat the person I don't know out for this role and why am I better than them. I think this plays into the imposter syndrome concept because basically you're not looking at you as a whole. You're not looking at you as someone who brings a great value to a role. You're looking at you as compared to any number of no-name, no-face people that you can only begin to kind of understand what they bring to the table. So you're trying to basically allow for whatever their advantages are. I mean, I'm looking for words and I'm not finding them well. Sorry, but and instead of building yourself up to that interviewer. So basically you're constantly on the defensive when you're presenting yourself as opposed to the offensive and saying, hey, look, I know this role. I know what you guys need. Here's why I am the right candidate for this role. So, I mean, I'm just thinking about this. It's funny because this episode is now going to, create the need for Scott therapy going forward for the next 6 months. I think.
I'll coach you, Scott. I'll be your coach. We got this. Because you're right. Like we have to stop competing. We have to stop seeing it as this competition with the other applicants.
Right.
Because you are, gosh, I don't know why I always use sports metaphors. I don't watch sports. Maybe it's because I'm a lesbian and I feel like I should. I think that it is so funny. Like you watch two football teams play each other.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of people who say this is the best team. There's a whole bunch of people who say the other one is the best team.
Right.
And really it's a flip a coin situation of how is every athlete showing up and, who's going to win. And then they're going to play again in a few weeks and the other team is going to win. And so when we put our value on if we win, am I the best? No, honestly, probably not. Like, is there somebody just as qualified as you, maybe more qualified than you, who's also interviewing?
Right.
Yeah. Does that mean that you don't deserve to be considered or that you don't even deserve the position? No. Yeah. So interviews are game time. Interviews is showing up, competing against yourself. If you can walk away from an interview saying, I'm proud of the way that I showed up, then if you get the job, great. If you don't, it doesn't mean you did something wrong. This is what I'm hearing a lot from the clients that I'm working with right now, where if they don't get the job, as soon as they get the declination email, they go, oh, what did I do wrong? I want to talk about, I want to rehearse the last call and I want to know what I did wrong.
What can you do better instead?
Yes. And it's heartbreaking sometimes to say, you probably didn't do anything wrong. You probably couldn't have done anything better, but you are in a pool of people who are also showing up to game time and playing their hardest.
Exactly. Yeah. There's like a whole, like, I mean, when you think you're like the only one entering for the job, and maybe there's other people who are, you know, about the same level as you and the same experience, in reality, there's like a ton of people that probably have better experience, that are exact match or exact fit for the company, or even more are an exact match and fit for the company, and they know the hiring manager, and you have no idea that they're talking to these people. All you know is just you're basically, it's like black box software testing.
Right.
You failed, but you really don't know why you failed. You just know that you failed.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think it's also worth mentioning, though. I mean, and Mark, you and I have talked about this in various forms throughout this podcast. In what it comes down to is, in an interview situation, if you've made it to the point where you're talking with the screener, the recruiter, the hiring manager, or your peers, it's table stakes that you can do the job, right? I mean, you've got the skills, and basically they make that assumption that you can do that. An interview is very rarely about that. Once they've determined that you can do the job, it becomes about what is your personality and how does your personality fit with the people that you're going to be working with.
Are you crazy?
Are you nuts? And so that's what it is. It's something where I have to constantly tell myself, okay, I can do this job. And I'm not trying to sell the fact that I can do this job at this point. Now it's understanding personality cues and communication cues from the people I'm speaking with, and trying to figure out, what do they prefer when working with someone else, and what personality styles gel best with them. So it has very little often to do with what you can do technically. Okay. It's got a lot to do with who you are and how you come off as a personality.
I mean, I used to do hiring for the agency that I worked at, and there would be people I'd look at, they look great on paper. You bring them in for the interview. I remember this one guy came in and he was like angry. He was like just angry. And he was angry at his last employer. He was kind of like angry just in general. I'm like, I can't put this guy on the phone. He's going to like kill everybody.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, and that's, I mean, it really is why it's like, I spend so much time emphasizing, like, yes, let's talk about how to communicate your technical skill set. Let's talk about how to communicate your quantifiable, obvious skill set. But also, let's also learn how to like read social cues and you know, lean into it, like respond to the interviewer's personality too. You know, because being especially for leadership positions, I loved my time at Facebook doing the leadership hiring, because so much of it is, are you going to be able to manage people? And what they're looking for is, are you able to read people? Are you able to read the room? Are you able to respond to cues? Right. You know, like so much of the interview didn't have anything to do with, you know, how many people did you manage? What were their job descriptions? How many did you promote? How many did you fire? How many did you, it's like, how did you interact with the interviewer?
Yeah. No, that's true.
Yeah. It's an in-depth topic, because we, and this is where over preparation is such an enemy to the way that we show up, because then we have an agenda, and agendas are not socially conducive.
No. Yeah. I think that is a thing too. Like when you get asked like an interview question, and then like you want to like totally like just like, you know, say as much as possible and like word barf on the poor, like, you know, interviewee, but you're doing it because you want to say like, hey, I actually know about this, and here are the 100 things that I know about that subject. But really they're like looking for like something more specific. And so I think imposter syndrome would cause people to kind of like do that, where they're like, oh, actually I know like everything A to Z about that. Let me list it all for you. Whereas really they're looking for like something like more specific or even more general, and you're kind of like overdoing it in the interview.
Yeah. It's why I cannot emphasize enough how important the things I'm proud of list is. Because when and if you kind of meditated or thought through that before an interview, you're going to show up differently than if you spent your preparation energy counting numbers, like, and bring data. Oh my God, I am not saying do not show up with your metrics, but But right before you walk in, put the metrics aside, set them down, and think about what you're most proud of. What makes you really special? What's going to make you the right choice versus the other exactly numerically qualified people as you?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And as much as I want to, it is good advice. And as much as I want to cite an Office Space quote in there, I don't think I'm going to do it. But
you have to now. What are you talking about?
Tom, the guy that's always worried about losing his job, when he comes in front of the Bobs and they're like, "So, Tom, you've been with the company for so long, or whatever. What do you do here?" "Well, I deliver the plans from the engineers to the customers, and I basically make sure that they get that information." "So you physically take the plans from the engineers to the customers and hand it to them?" "Well, no, my admin does that." "So what would you say you do here?" "I'm a people person, God damn it. Can't you tell I'm a people person?
I'm good with talking to people. What the hell is wrong with you people?"
And that's the thing. It's like, it's a personality show. And so, again, Jesse, you're right. Know what you bring into the table, and know where your wins are, what you're proud of. You don't need to come in and talk, basically process. You don't have to talk the job necessarily. Just show up, be yourself, understand what makes you compelling as a person and not just as an employee. And I know
all of my jobs that I got, so my trajectory is a fun one. I was 26 with no money, no education, no work history. I only worked in restaurants. Yeah, right. And it's just like, somebody pay me more than $9 an hour, please. I have 2 little children and I'm trying to make a life happen. And you know what? You know what got me the job? It wasn't the fact that I had waited a lot of tables. It was how I showed up in the interview, and I got a manager job. My first job, I got to meet people. And it was because of the way that I showed up. And it was, as I'm going through explaining my waitressing experience, my bartending experience, because on my resume, it's like delivered food to tables, took their orders, made change, that's what's on your resume after this. But that's not what I talked about in the interview. I talked about the people who asked to sit in my section, and the regulars that I had who came in after their son's Little League game, and he got a beer and he got a root beer, and I put it in a Frosty mug so that the kid would feel special. Those are the things. It wasn't I waited on this many tables, I turned this many tables, I made this much in tips. It was I built relationships with the people who came in, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's good. How do you feel about leading people?" And I was like, "Well, okay." And it was at Target, and so I still only made $9.50 an hour, but it built my resume.
It did.
Damn straight.
It was a good move. It was Okay. So I think, to summarize, I think a couple of points that we want the audience to remember. We want them to remember kind of like do you have a fancy label for the 5 stages of like getting yourself out of it? Or is it?
I don't have a fancy label. This is just my coaching technique with people.
Okay.
But,
you have to patent it.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'll put a name on it. But if you want one that's great, that has similar things. So Tara Brock is a Dharma speaker. She's amazing. And she has one that's really well known. It's called RAIN, and it's recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. So I add an express step in there because that's the somatic piece of it, is like get it out of your body through movement. But really, really good steps out there. RAIN by Tara Brock is really, really good. And of course, hire me as a coach and I will teach you everything you need to know.
Absolutely.
There you go. So
we can't promote that enough.
Yeah, exactly. So we want the audience to remember that. We want them to think about their kind of like daily list of things that they've done that they're proud of, or, affirmations, whatever that is, have that available, just as a history. And then also for interviews, when you're speaking to companies, have that available, but also have available, like you said, the hard numbers, like the hard
balance. Data. Yeah, I would say 50-50 to show up equally as prepared to speak to your quantifiable achievements, and make sure that you're just as prepared to show up about who you are and what makes you special from like a character and presentation standpoint.
Yeah. And then the final thing I think is what you just said is time from there. What makes you special? What are the things? What makes you proud to do the job that you're doing? Like, what are you bringing that's going to make you different than like the next person
Mhm.
who hits all the numbers and blah blah blah. Like what's gonna make you different?
Well, and even so, one of the most important things I think, because you only get to that first step of noticing when you've built cues into your mind, right? And so, because you have to catch yourself, because usually we're so far down the rabbit hole before we've recognized that we're in this imposter syndrome hole.
Right.
So catching yourself earlier and earlier in that, oh wait, I'm feeling like a fraud. It is so important. Having that first thought is so important. We always talk about how self-awareness is the end of the journey, but to me, self-awareness is actually step one. You can't start any work until you've become self-aware. So every recovery program, step one is admit that you have a problem.
Right.
So catching yourself in that step one of, oh, I'm feeling doubt, I'm feeling shame, I'm feeling like a fraud, and really getting comfortable letting that be a moment.
Yeah.
Because there's so much that can happen once you can actually get to that point of going, oh, I'm feeling like a fraud.
Well, and then as a follow-on to that, the follow-on steps in those recovery programs are let it go and throw it out to the universe. Yeah. It's not you anymore. It does not control what you're doing or who you are.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
There you go.
All right. Any last comments from Mark or Jesse?
No, I mean, this is a great topic. I think that literally, so Brené Brown does a Dare to Lead podcast. Her book is great too, but she has a podcast on imposter syndrome where she meets with the authors of an article, Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome, one of the top Harvard Business Review articles of all time. So it's a really good one. And she talked about teaching her MBA course. Brené Brown was talking about this and how she asked everyone in the room to raise their hand if they've ever dealt with imposter syndrome, and 100% of the class raised their hand. So I just want to offer as an encouragement to the job seekers, to whoever's listening, just remember that like 100% of the population.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we put that in? Is there like later for the audience we can put like a link to that? Is this something that like it's public that they can read?
Yeah, okay. both the article and the podcast, and it's great. Okay. Both of them are great.
Yeah, we'll put it in there too. I think that'll be good reference material.
That'd be really cool. Well, all right. This has been a very cool conversation, spirited and all that. And now I have to walk away and think, how do I readjust myself to kind of get in the right frame of mind going forward? So once again, we have had the pleasure of being joined by the fabulous Jesse Lane from JaneLaneCareerCoaching.com. And Mark and I will bid you adieu until the next time. Thanks for joining, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Until next time, we bid you a cheese fondue.
Ah, yes.
Oh, no.